All right, so here's our notes on the evidence for evolution. So if you haven't already, go ahead, little classwork. It's in our Unit 6. You want to make sure that you have here your Cornell notes open, ready to go. All right, so let's go ahead and make sure that you're adding your highlights and your summary. So let's go ahead and get started. All right. So evidence for evolution. You've actually probably are going to be like, oh, Miss V, we already talked about this. We've seen a lot. But I just kind of want to give a kind of an overview with some notes so that you have all the details in there. Okay. So our essential question for this one is, what is the evidence we use to prove a species has gone through evolution? Okay. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that we actually have. The first one is a fossil record, which you guys saw with the sticklebacks, and then the homologous body structures, which we talked about with the sticklebacks, the vestigial organs, embryology, and then biochemical evidence. And I'll go through each one of those for you guys. All right, so the fossil records, and it's a record of the history of life on Earth. So just like when we talked about our superposition, our oldest ones are on the bottom. Okay, and it's just like this one, which I can never say. I don't even know why I put it in those notes. But Archaeopteryx is the missing link between reptiles and birds. So as we found those fossils, we've seen, hey, here's something that looks like a bird, but yet is like a reptile. So those animals must have at one time come from this animal, just like when we looked at the dogs, right? We had them all come from the gray fox, and they came out with all these breeds and these different types. Well, we've actually seen a missing link between the birds and reptiles, okay? And that's because, as we talked about plate tectonics, everything was kind of in very close to each other in Pangea. They're very close. And so we've seen actually fossil remains of a tricerat land reptile here and fossil remains of a freshwater reptile here. We've seen the same fossils at times on different continents. So that means that they must have been able to cross at one time. And that's where we have seen the theory of Pangea. Okay. So, homologous body structures. You've heard me talk about them. Let's actually look at them. So, homologous body structures are similar anatomy in different types of animals because of a common ancestor. Okay. So, like a hand really looks like, look at this, the fin of a dolphin. It also really looks like the wing of a bat or the wing of a bird. All these bones look extremely similar as you go down. Okay. And so, such as we can look here. So this is an ancient lobe-finned fish. So this is a lobe from a fish. But we see things that are very similar in a turtle, an alligator, a bird, and a mammal. And we see this bone structure that is very similar. It's just got small changes as we go to the different species. Okay. And the second part is vestigial organs. So vestigial organs are leftover traces of evolution that serve no purpose. So basically, as we see in this animal here, there's a little bone right here, and it's attached to nothing. Don't really know what it does. And so we call those vestigial organs, which means they were there for a reason at one time. And in another animal, it's like a pelvis and a femur, if we kind of look at it closer, is what it looks like. So at one time, it must have had legs, you would think. And so these kind of show that there was a different animal that maybe this actually evolved from, okay? And so how do you explain the presence of these bones, such as in a python? Look at a python. So a python actually has what we call pelvic girdle, okay, and just like our pelvis, but they're very small. It has a femur and a hind limb, and it also has vertebral column. But look at, what are these bones for? They're just kind of sitting out here. So what are they for? And so we can kind of look and see, we have kind of things like that. You can see how it crosses across. You have the vertebrae, and then you kind of have a cross, and you have these bones coming down, kind of like our pelvis. So you wonder, Why do they look so similar, but these serve no purpose, right? Okay. Our second thing that we look at when we talk about evolution and we start kind of connecting them, and we'll start doing that in class with some of our labs, is embryology. Embryos of all vertebrates are very similar early on. So look at these. These are all embryos. A fish looks like this. A reptile looks like this. A bird looks like this. And we look like that. Why do we all look very similar? It's like when we start out, we're very similar. Okay, and so you can see even from a chick embryo, right? And here's a human. We have some pharyngeal pouches. Those are the pouches where our pharynx, or where we'll start breathing from, is, and a post-anal tail. You have a tail before you come out. But it disappears as you grow inside the uterus, okay? So the last one is our biochemical evidence, and that's biochemistry. We call it biochemistry because in biology it has to do with chemistry. And that's DNA with more similar sequences suggests species are more closely related. So for example, humans and chimpanzees share them more than 98% of identical DNA sequences. So that means 2% of our DNA is what actually makes us human and different from them. Okay? And look at this. There's a bunch of pictures I have here too. Look at the eyes of the owl, and then look at the moth, right? Crazy. And then let's look at the coral snake and the milk snake. So these two actually probably evolved, and one of them is probably because they came from the same ancestor, but then they live in different parts. So we have the milk snake and the coral snake. One is poisonous and one is not. Of course, this one's probably also a defense mechanism so that the animals won't eat it because they think it's a coral snake and poisonous, okay? Here's a gecko that has probably evolved with those colors based on its environment. How about this bird? It's evolved to the color of the sand, which we're going to talk about with the rock pocket mouse. And here is a frog that has evolved to look, right? Look at this. Hopefully you guys can see him. He's an iguana. He's very nicely camouflaged here on this tree. And here's a snake that has evolved with all these colors exactly like the outside world. I don't know if you guys can see this one. This one is a fish, right? And he's right here. If you guys can see his eyes, they're right there. He's very well hidden. How about a stigmatid? Those are pretty fun. Hopefully you see him. He's right there. There's his eyes right there. Okay, how about a flower manatid? This one was a hard one when I first found this one, of where this one lives. And if you can look, its eyes are right there. And then there's a leg, and there's another leg. All right, so that's the end of our notes for evidence of our evolution that we have. You can go ahead and process your notes, highlight any important notes, make connections to any of your notes in the left-hand column, write any questions you may have in the left-hand column, and then use your highlights, connections, and questions for your summary. And then make sure you write a 3 to 5 sentence summary before you submit your notes. And if you have any questions, please let me know.